In today's video, I want to revisit an old theory and give an update on who will actually make the U20 roster. At that point in time, it only covered up to the 3rd round offers, and since then we've had the 4th round increases, where we had Fukaku having an impressive game and getting a huge increase into the top 23. The 3 fraud characters didn't sub in at all for Ubers, and finally the 2 strikers referred to as frauds by the fandom, Sendo and Otoya, both ended up scoring, getting good salaries and basically cementing the fact they will make the roster. We've also explored some of the PXG vs Bastard Munich match, and so some of my opinions of Nanase and Kiora have been altered. So with that being said, I can update my old prediction to this new one, where in summary, Sendo and Otoya both practically secure a spot on the roster, and Zantetsu, Nanase, Igaguri and Kiora fight for one of the final spots. Another theory I was thinking of is what happens if the top 23 gets expanded to the top 26, like the latest World Cup. And so instead of Igaguri, Nanase and Kiora fighting for one of the final spots, where 2 get eliminated, then they actually share the final spot, as the 3 bottom characters tie for the 23rd spot, and get 30 million each. And then we can have Sai as the 26th player join. I generally believe there's a good chance that the top 26 actually happens. But for the rest of the video, I'll just focus on the final spots on the 23-man roster. In my original video, the key hints to figuring out who will make it included who had volume covers and their current jersey number in the NEL, but I do want to emphasize that it only increases their chance, it does not guarantee a spot. For the jersey number theory, in general characters have specific numbers dedicated to them, like Isagi being 11, Nagi 7, Bachara 8, Baru 13, etc. And then some of the other characters like Ryo, Yuki, Corona, Ayu, Sendo, etc. having unique NEL numbers. And so coming into the U20 World Cup, they will continue using their dedicated number. However, characters like Otoya and Shido do not have a number yet, even though they will probably make the U20 World Cup. And then we have other characters like Kiyora, Nanase and Zantetsu who don't have numbers in this range, fighting for one of the remaining spots. And so in general, I think their U20 jersey numbers will be something like this. The other thing I want to point out is the volume cover theory, which won't happen. For those who don't know, it's basically whoever got their volume covers will make the final 23. And since Nanase got the latest volume cover with Kiora previously, it would mean the lovable Zantetsu will get eliminated if this theory holds. But I'm confident it won't, and I'll tell you why. Volumes last 9 chapters long, and the latest volume 29 covers the beginning and the first 9 chapters of the PXG vs Bastard Munich game. Since this is the final and biggest game in the NEL, it is fair to assume it will be as long, if not longer, than both the Manshine and Uber's games. The Manshine match started in chapter 173 and ended in 203, and there's some fluff before the Uber's game, which lasted from 209 to about 239. And so in general, the match lasts 30 chapters long gameplay wise, and then they will have a few chapters after the match. So if PXG vs Bastard Munich is the same length, I'm guessing it will be around 30 chapters too, gameplay wise, with the remainder of the 4th volume concluding the arc. So I'm extremely confident it will be 4 volumes long. Then since we have Nanase already, that leaves 3 more characters to get volume covers. And so the 3 obvious candidates are the only 3 important blue lockers left, Zantetsu, Igaguri and Charles, which would mean the volume cover theory is debunked. Before going further, I want to briefly talk about Burasuta in chapter 248. Where he prompts a new idea to the PFA president, meaning we will likely see some change going forward. The most likely request is he gains broadcasting rights to the games and potentially move it to Japan. The other potential change I could see is the rulebook, where I do want to say don't worry, I'm not expecting them to change the rules to the 3 goal limit like the NEL, but I think they may remove the limitations on who can actually play in the U20 World Cup. So there's a decent chance the roster gets expanded to 26 people like the current World Cup, and can include characters like Igaguri, Kiora and Sai for the final roster, even if they don't make the top 23. And I say this can happen simply because it already has. As the U20 rules state, they only permit 21 players, not the 23 Ego requested, and so that's already one necessary change in the manga. I'm honestly not sure if the author mixed it up with the actual U2018 World Squad, which allowed 23 players, but for this 2019 U20 Cup it's meant to be 21, and so I think the roster number can increase to 26 like the 2022 World Cup. The other change required is the fact the team needs 3 goalkeepers, and so far we only have one other goalkeeper, being Fukaku. but we don't have a third yet, and so I don't think this requirement will stay. I think this rule will just be ignored and Gagamaru will play goalkeeper every single game, where he doesn't get injured or subbed off. A potential rule change they could do is pull someone from the preliminary squad in case of an emergency, but for the most part I think it just won't exist in the story. The third rule that may need change is the player age requirement, where I think they will remove the minimum threshold of 16 for the U20 World Cup. As we know, Charles is distinctly said to be 15 during the NEL, with his birthday being in February. Since the NEL is in early 2019, and if Charles is 15 then, his birthday would be February 22nd, 2004, which means he would be too young and ineligible to play in the U20 World Cup. Alternatively, this change doesn't actually have to happen, as there's a chance that neither Charles nor Loki play in this tournament, instead for the actual World Cup later, and so the U20 French team may just not be important, and probably fodder in the tournament. And so now I can actually talk about the individual characters. In my eyes, there are 20 people practically locked in for a final spot now, assuming that either Nagi and Rio don't suck for a third game in a row, and there are no funny business with any other characters like Shido. And so there's a handful of characters competing for one of the 3 final spots. The first character I want to talk about is the second goalkeeper, Fukaku. In a lot of people's minds, Fukaku is needed to be a second goalkeeper, and too many people are locked in the idea that he has to make it, even though it's not guaranteed yet. And honestly, it's a fair argument and makes sense for a Fukaku to join, because having more than one goalkeeper makes sense, but there's still a good chance he doesn't. In the Ubers game, he subbed in and proceeded to do nothing of value on the screen. If he just stopped Hiyori's shot, you can make a stronger case of him surviving, but then he proceeds to have some monster performance so good in the Manshine game that he has one of the largest value increases, cementing a spot in the top 23. And I've seen people say, what's the point of the author giving him such a high bid just to discard him anyway instead of being the second goalkeeper? And the reason is simple, he wanted a threshold character. Since Ubers have finalized their final offers, Fukaku's bid is locked at 28 million. He can't gain or lose a value in the final round. Realistically, Raichi and Hiyori are both playing well currently and will exceed his salary by the end of the NEL. Meanwhile, Zantetsu and Tokimitsu already have high salaries already and shouldn't have much trouble exceeding Fukaku's value of 28. And so there's a good chance his max rank will be 23rd and will likely place beneath it. The other fact we know is that Rio said that at the rate Nagi and he are going, they may not survive. And since Rio is already at 34, it's reasonable to assume the final 23rd spot will be around 30 million. And so now we have our threshold number, and so if Kiora, Igaguri or Nanase want to survive, they must now exceed this number in order to steal the final spot on the roster. And so for the rest of the video, you have to remember this threshold is important to survive. Now outside the top 20, I think the character who has the highest chance of surviving is Tokimitsu, and I really doubt he doesn't make it. He has a volume cover, the unique number 20 jersey, appears on color spreads, was with the squad during their break, and already has a 23 million salary. And so he probably has the highest chance to exceed this threshold, as 5 million is fairly easy to do, like Ayu did. And since his character is fairly relevant and more important than someone like Kiora, there's a good chance he just makes it. The one reason he may not make it is because he hasn't performed the best in the Barca Munich vs PXG game so far, but people are jumping the gun on Toki too early. He is a stamina beast and a late game player. The longer the game goes, the better he is with his infinite stamina. And I honestly think he will be able to match Corona's movements and can match Raichi's stamina too. The other benefit is that Toki plays in Rin's system, which we haven't seen score yet, so he has more to contribute as the match continues. However, being in Rin's system may also bite him in the back. As they said, if Rin falls and doesn't become the hero, so does Nanase and Toki, which could foreshadow them both getting eliminated. However, I don't think that's very likely. Now the next character who has a good chance to survive is Zantetsu. With Nanase getting the latest cover, I've seen a lot of people discount him already and say that he'll get eliminated and his fate is sealed. But as I said earlier, the volume cover theory won't happen and shouldn't diminish his chances. I've seen people say that he isn't good enough and his acceleration is useless since we have other speedsters like Corona and Chigiri, but that's very disingenuous to his skills, as he is very talented. Zantetsu was one of the best characters in the first selection and has been pretty sidelined since. We've seen him get explored further in episode Nagi with his backstory and his ego, but his presence has been lacking since. Unlike a lot of characters, Zantetsu actually has a huge ego and ambitions to be the best. We see his dreams, etc., and he is fleshed out enough to make the final team. And I want to emphasize his actual huge ego. As we see after the U20 match, he's not satisfied as he didn't play yet. And we also see in the NEL that he isn't satisfied with the 24th spot, and I don't see the author kicking him out again. And the other really important thing is that it will be very difficult for Zantetsu to be kicked out of the top 23. Assuming Toki makes it, then it will require both Kiora and Nanase to overtake his final value, where Zantetsu already has a sizable advantage and will get another increase after the match too. And despite losing, there's a good chance he exceeds 30 million as his final offer, and so it's very difficult for both Nanase and Kiora to overtake his value. Now the downside with Zantetsu is similar to Toki, where his presence in the actual match hasn't been stellar. Like, he hasn't played horribly, but a lot of his panels are him bursting to the ball and someone from Bayern Munich reaching it first. The other downside is he plays on Shido's system, who already scored, and so he probably won't directly contribute to another goal. But I really doubt that's it for Zantetsu, as the one big thing I'm expecting is for Loki and Zantetsu to have a chemical reaction based on their speed once he subs in later into the game. That being said, I think Zantetsu's chance of joining is significantly higher than current perception, and will have a higher chance than some of the following discussed characters. Now the next thing I want to say affects every other character I want to talk about in the video, and that's how it's extremely difficult to survive with no starting salary. Remember before when I talked about Fukaku's 28 million threshold, and how if a character wants to survive they have to exceed that number? Well, the issue is they only have a singular game to exceed this number. But I do want to emphasize how it's insanely difficult to reach this threshold. Like, look at every other salary offer rounds and look how many characters go above this threshold in a singular game. And I'll give you a hint, it's barely anyone. In the first offer, the 3 highest were people who all scored a goal, with only Butcher and Reen making this threshold. Now let's look at the second round offers, and you realize that once again, the top dogs are the ones to score, as we see Chigiri and Yuki barely exceed Fukaku's salary in threshold. And let's be real, a character like Kiora or Igaguri won't score in this match. And the only 2 people to exceed this threshold who did not score are Isuki, who took 2 games, and Ryo, who had a phenomenal game, which we know someone like Kiora isn't having currently. If a character like Igaguri or Kiora play at a similar level to Corona in the Manshine game, that wouldn't even be enough to make the top 23, and that's why I want to emphasize how difficult it is. Especially if we have characters like Aiku, Ayu and Atoya who have played 2 games by now and still haven't reached this 28 million threshold. We move on to the third round offers and you realize that about 10 new players are added and none of them are even close to Fukaku's threshold to survive. We've seen PXG play twice and neither Karasu or Shido haven't made it yet, and now we've seen both Aiku and Ayu play their 3rd game to finally make it. Then we see Raichi's and Hyori's offers in their first game, and neither make this threshold, although in Hyori's case he only played in a fraction of the match. We then jump into the 4th round offers with Shido and Karasu making their threshold in the 3rd game, and Tokimitsu, Zantetsu and Nanase are still under this threshold with 2 games played, going on to their 3rd. So what does this actually mean? Well, I want to emphasize how extremely difficult it is for someone like Kiora or Igaguri to make the final roster with a starting salary of 0. It took amazing supporting characters like Karasu, Shido, Ayu and Aiku 3 games, and it took some characters like Nico and Corona too to finally reach this threshold. To reach the top 23 in a singular game would require them to score like Yukimiya, Chigiri, etc., which is extremely unlikely given the characters left, or perform at a similar level to Ryo in the Manshine game. We also know that goal contributions are extremely important in determining their ranking, as stated by Hyori. So unless a character like Kiora or Igaguri directly assist Isuki, then their chance of exceeding the threshold is very low. Now the next character I want to talk about is Kiora. He was introduced fairly late into the story, where he was meant to sub into the Ubers game, but as we know Hyori subbed in instead of him. So Kiora is starting from scratch with 0 games played and no salary, and so for him to make it he must have an insanely high offer with a singular game, which isn't impossible but definitely difficult, as it seems the only way for him to survive is if he either scores or assists Isuki. Like I emphasized before, him getting a volume cover does not guarantee him a spot on the final roster, but it does help his chance. That coupled with the fact that he actually has a bit of merchandise and how he was on the Halloween color spread, it looks good for him on paper. The fact that he's had so much marketing and push helps the agenda of him making the team, especially since we will see him soon in episode Nagi. The fact no one even bothered hyping him up and told him to be ready for the next game where he promised he would play should indicate that he would do something extremely impactful in the match, but the question is, will it be good enough to survive? If Kiora assists Izagi, then there's a good chance he finds a slot on the team, because why would they auto waste an assist from him instead of someone like Corona or Yukimiya? But there's no guarantee he even assists, and so his impactful moment may not be enough to secure a spot. As we know, he hasn't had his moment yet, and he probably won't until after the spin-off manga has Kiora face Nagi and expands on him during the match, so it'd be a bit unfair to judge him on his current skill level as opposed to how he will perform by the end of the match. But it's also important to mention how he is performing currently, and the nicest way possible, he isn't playing well. So far he lost to Karasu, which isn't horrendous since Karasu is great at winning duels like that, but when you get cooked by Nanase not once but twice, it really makes you question how he will survive instead of all the other characters. We are 1/3 of the way done this match, and he hasn't displayed anything yet. His current performance would be lucky to even get him 5 million, and clearly Nanase, Tokimitsu and Zantetsu are clearly above him in performance and chance of joining the final team. So on to the next character, and that's Nanase. With his recent volume cover and the fact he has actual character development as he discovered a new weapon, and the fact that he's actually playing well, the chance of him joining is actually much higher than my previous tier list stated. Unlike Kiora and Igaguri, Nanase has a salary and it's within his realm to overtake Fukaku for that final spot, and if he keeps up his current performance and actually becomes someone to assist Rin, then he basically locks in that final spot, although there's still a chance that Charles takes it instead. He needs to get over a 12 million increase to get that final spot, and it's within the realm of believability for him to survive and fulfill his ego, originality and hunger to make the final team. The other thing I want to highlight is how fixated he is in surviving, and you could say that is his originality. Since before even the Barca Munich and PXG match, his whole fixation and hunger is to survive and make the top 23. He has higher ambitions than someone like Igaguri, who is satisfied in just being a starter, and we still have no hint to what Kira's originality is. However, there is a chance, and not a low one, of him getting a Naruhaya moment, where he fails to make the top 23 in favour of someone else like Kiora. There's a small hint of him actually not surviving, which was with Tokimitsu in chapter 254, where they state if Rin doesn't become the hero of the match, then they will fail, as they rely on Rin, and as we know, Izagi will actually be the hero of the match, not Rin. Well, Rin is basically guaranteed to score, and judging by the pace of the match, it seems like Barca Munich will score the next goal, which would leave Rin the 4th goal, just like Baro and Nagi. We will likely see him go on his Destroyer flow, where he changes his ego type from a world type that Izagi expects to an individual type, which is his true ego, the one that Sai knew of previously. In his Destroyer flow, he intends to beat every player on the enemy team using their own strengths, and so I'm guessing that Rin will score with a curved direct shot. Now the thing is, I originally thought that when he enters this flow that he disposes of his teammates in order to score, but after rereading the U20 match, he was still willing to work with Izagi. He just goes out of his way to destroy everyone on the opponent's team. So Rin can still use Nanase in order to score, and I wouldn't be shocked if he contributed in one way or another. However, if Nanase and Rin still can't score, then Rin may actually throw him away like he said in training. We do know that Rin acknowledged his development, but it doesn't guarantee Nanase assisting Rin. Since goals this match are all going to be top performances, the question is, will Nanase have a top performance and a chemical reaction with Rin, or will it be the more likely character, Charles? As we know, he is a character that dislikes passing to Rin because he is boring, and as a contrarian it makes sense since Rin is very calculated and efficient. But Rin's Destroyer flow is significantly more fun and would entice Charles to actually assist him. It's the exact playstyle that Charles likes to play with. I'm expecting Charles to do more than just assist Shido this match, and it makes sense for him to assist both Shido and Rin for their goals, especially since PXG is used to develop Charles. With Charles being able to assist both Rin and Shido, we may see Loki impressed and willing to sub in to test a Loki x Charles chemical reaction, and so I'm pretty confident that Charles would be the one to assist Rin, but I still expect Nanase to contribute to the goal, just like how Karasu and Hiyori were both vital in assisting the 2 previous goals. Now the other reason we may see him get eliminated is simply for the emotional damage to the readers. If someone like Kiora gets eliminated, a lot of people won't care as it's fairly irrelevant to the story so far. But someone like Nanase, who is desperately trying to survive and get the last spot, and someone who had a lot of development during the match, then his elimination will hit harder to the readers. Nanase is a character I think has a good shot to make it, simply because his current salary is in a good spot, and even if he doesn't assist Ring, he can exceed Fukaku's salary by having a good game. I wouldn't be shocked if he didn't make the roster, but seeing as how difficult it is for Kiora to reach this threshold and overtake him, the only way I see him getting the spot over Nanase is if he directly assists Igaguri. That being said, I'm rooting for Nanase to get the final spot, and I do believe he has the best chance. Now Igaguri is similar to Kiora in the sense they are both starting with nothing, and so he has to exceed the threshold in not just one game, but a fraction of the game, since he hasn't even subbed in yet. Even Hiyori, who went God mode, didn't break the threshold, so there's an extremely good chance that his luck runs out here, and he just goes pro, as he becomes a starter. And since we know his hunger is just not to take over the temple and become a starter, he can still satisfy this without making the top 23. The fact he is not subbed in yet may actually increase his value, as Igaguri will likely play a defensive position like a centre back, and so he can't make mistakes. For example, if PXG go up 2-1 against Barca Munich, and if Igaguri subs in then for the remainder of the match PXG can't score a goal, and it means as a defender he succeeded as he doesn't concede any goals for Bastard. And I'd argue it would look better for his offers as opposed to him starting and conceding 2 goals. The other benefit is if he is a defensive player, the U20 team consists of a lot of forwards and offensive players already, and seeing as there's barely any centre backs, he could be an option. The other reason I'll say he doesn't have a non-zero chance of making it is what does it mean to be a starter. Well, we know he doesn't want to be a bench warmer and sub in, and he wants to play the full match, and so logically it makes sense that if he performs well, he can become one. The next question is what a star salary is though. We know Grim has a 40 million salary, which is beyond taking in a singular game, but he will likely aim for a defensive position, and that is either Mensa or Birkenstock spots. Well, we actually know their salaries. If we look at the Ubers game, we see Lorenzo directly state that Mensa and Birkenstock's salaries are 27 million and 30, as we know everyone else's salaries on the field. But wait a minute, if Igaguri steals their spot as starters and gets a salary similar to them, that would give him a salary within the threshold range of making the top 23. So do I actually think he will make it? Well no, I think this will be the end of Igaguri for now, as I expect him to come back for the actual World Cup. I'm expecting him to do something to warrant a starting position on the team, but his hunger lies here. He doesn't want a top 3 spot like Nanase, he just wants to be a starter. Now the next character I think that has a slim chance to make it is Neru. He came in so strong and in such a waste of potential, but in the off chance he can stall Loki, then there's a slim possibility. But seeing how sidelined he is, now he's the least important member on the team currently, his chances are low, although I still expect him to sub in later. The last character who has a chance to make the top 23 is Nishioka, which is a weird one. I know he is a mean character and will likely do nothing, but if a random character was to snatch the final spot, it would be him. He is coming into the final game against Barca, the worst team in the league, and so if Nishioka actually scores a goal then, there's a chance he survives. Personally, I'm expecting Manshine to win, but the question is who will score in that match. Will Nagi get a hat-trick like Ring Baru and likely Isagi to complete the top 4, or will Chigiro, Ryo and Nagi score? Now the reason why Nishioka may score is simply because Nagi and Ryo need to split up or do something different than previous rounds. They are too codependent, so if Ryo assists someone else like Nishioka, then he could snatch the final spot. That being said, it's extremely unlikely for Nishioka to score, so don't expect it, but it isn't impossible. Now I also want to briefly talk about Sai, who I'm not expecting to play in the U20 World Cup, mainly because I don't think he'll be the 23rd spot, as we've seen countless times that the 23rd person is happy to make it, and the 24th person is dissatisfied. So it'd be weird if Sai would just snatch the final spot. And the other reason I don't think he'll play is simply because we have Hiyori, and it would be weird if Sai just steals Hiyori's screen time, since they share skill sets and mentality. Like I mentioned before, if Sai was to play, I do believe he would be the 24th spot, or maybe we'll see the 26-man roster. Otherwise, I don't believe he'll take the 23rd spot. And so in my personal prediction, I'm expecting Zantetsu and Tokimitsu to get the 2 spots, and the final 23rd spot will be a fight between Nanase, Igaguri and Kiora to finalize the top 23. There is a chance the top 26 does happen, but they aren't fighting and all 3 make it, as they tie for the 23rd spot. But if we're going to consider a 23-man roster, then I think that the final spot will be between Nanase and Kiora, and it will come down to this next play. If Kiora scores the goal or is the one to directly assist Kaiso or Isagi, then even if he starts from a zero salary, I think he'll find a way to survive and attain the final spot. With Kiora getting relevance in the next chapter, and a spin-off match happening very soon, it feels like we are finally going to see Kiora's hype in action. And personally, I've expected Kiora to assist Izuki for like a year now, and so I'm hoping we see it soon. But seeing as it's difficult to exceed the threshold, then Nanase on paper has the best chance to survive, in the sense that he has a higher current bid and it's plausible for him to exceed it. However, Nanase is a character hinted to fall and get eliminated. If the author intends to eliminate an important talking character, they would foreshadow or hint to their elimination, which is why I think Zantetsu is still safe, as he hasn't had any build up to get actually eliminated yet. Nanase's overfixation on surviving, and the fact that Charles will likely be the one to assist Rin, then that makes me think that the author is building up for Nanase's inevitable and heartbreaking elimination. With that being said, let me know who you think will make the final roster, and as always, Buddha be praised, take care, and have a good day.